Right. So, any question before I move on to the next topic? All right. So, in the last day, we spoke about exception, and I demonstrated two programs. One, not handling the exception. The other one, when I handle the exception. Right. Now, so we already learned how do we handle an exception. How do we handle an exception? So we know the significance of a try block, we know the significance of a catch block. Now what next we gonna do? What next we gonna do is, can we develop the exception of our choice? Can we develop the exception of our choice? Day dot 10, and the package is day dot 10. Let me create a package. It's day dot 10. Then we did one activity that was on day 6, I believe. Yes. Then let me copy all the piece of code there. Yeah. So I moved on to, I created a package called day.10. Then in that, I added all the classes from day 6 assignment. Then let me run it first. What exactly I was doing on that program. There was an activity where a customer account, and there are two types of customers, personal and commercial, and there was an account class, and there was a bank with single array, right? And there was a program called run, through which I was running the program. Now let me run this to understand the flow of the application. So it's asking you to create the customers. So we are creating the first personal customer. Then I enter the name, then address need to be entered, then the home phone number, and then the work phone number. Congratulations, this is what your customer ID and account number. Then I create one more personal customer. Congratulations, you got the customer ID and account number. Then I create one commercial customer. Oh, okay, I'm doing deposit now. I'm depositing the amount. Oh, there was to select the operation 3, then okay, fine. So it's asking for an account number. So let me enter the account number So the account number is 1000, or we would say 10,002 amount. Here is your transaction ID, and the kind of transaction is deposit, and when you did it, and this is the amount involved in the transaction. Perfect. I want to create one more commercial customer. The name of the commercial customer is Van. Address, name of the contact person, and home phone number of the contact person. Anything we can give. Right. So I hope you understood what is happening here. So let me show you the code. There was a customer.java, and in the customer, every customer has an account here. Every customer has an account. Then you have a personal customer, you have a commercial customer. Right. So personal customer and commercial customer, they inherit the customer.java. Then there was a bank with single array. So there wasn't a customer array. So every time you call create personal customer or you call create commercial customer, the respective objects are created and stored into the customer array. So when I want to deposit, I'll start searching for the account number in the customer array, or I can also deposit using customer ID, and I'll start searching in the customer array only. So this all seems to be good, but what exactly why I came back to this application is the question now. What I want to do is, if you see, I was not throwing any exceptions in this activity. I was not throwing any exceptions in this activity. If a person is short of money, rather what I'm doing here is, here we go. When it comes to withdrawal, right? So this was a deposit. So there is no withdraw program being written here. Okay, fine. I will not be interested in the withdraw. Then I'll see something called, customer not found exception or something like this. Okay, here we go. Let me create an exception. I was trying to talk about the customized exception. So let me create a class. Let's say ID not exist class, or ID not found exception. I want to write my custom exception. So my class name is ID not found exception, but it cannot become an exception class. It can become an exception class by extending the class exception. So if you see, I'm trying to create a user defined exception. So one can create an exception of his or her choice by extending the class exception. One can create an exception of his or her choice by extending the class exception. Now here, what I would like to do, I would like to override a method. Right click in the class, you got a source, then you say here override or implement methods. What method you want to override? I just want to override a toString method. And what you want to return? I'll say here no customer found with a given ID. Or let's do that, because we are doing the deposit basing on account number, right? So we are also doing the deposit basing on account number. Let's see that. Run the bank. So we have our case file. Perfect. So no customer found with a given ID. This is what this exception class right? And no customer found with a given ID. You have a class and it got a method called toString. And I would like to talk about the significance of toString. This toString method gets invoked automatically from println. I'll say what exactly it is. If you remember your last day session regarding the exception, what are you printing here? System.out.println, it was printing E, right? So you don't see any difference between this. Now let me run this arithmetic exception, right? So I have an integer. You see? Do you see any difference between the printing only E and printing E dot toString? The thing is, your E dot toString gets called automatically. ToString gets invoked automatically. ToString gets invoked automatically. You don't need to explicit call, or you can say ToString doesn't need explicit call, does not need explicit call from println. It doesn't need an explicit method call from println method. Now, so what I'm doing is when I create my user defined exception, I need to extend the exception class, then I need to override the toString method, right? Or instead of toString method, people can write the method of their choice. I can write the method of my choice. Get the exception message. But when you do this, it needs an explicit call. The above method need an explicit call. Whereas your toString doesn't need any explicit call. That is the difference here. So this is fine, but how do I use this? Here we go. What I need to do is, I'm searching for, in order to do deposit or withdraw, what I do, I need to search for this ID, right? If you look at this, what is happening here? You are trying to search for the account number, or you are trying to look for the customer ID. This is what we target. I try to look for the customer ID, and if the customer ID is found, what I'm doing here, I'm returning that customer object. If the customer ID is found, alright, I return that customer object. So if you focus here, what I'm trying to do is, if null not equal to customer, if it is not null, return customer. Okay. If it is not null, return customer, or you can simply say return customer. You don't need to check. If the customer ID is found, it returns customer, otherwise no. But what I would like to do is, if the customer ID is found, it returns customer object, otherwise it returns null. But here what I am trying to do is, if the customer is null, I am trying to throw an exception. what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to throw an exception. But why I'm using throw, new and exception? Did I did it in the yesterday's class? Did I say throw new arithmetic exception from the try block? Did I say throw new arithmetic exception from the try block? I didn't. Did I say throw new input mismatch exception? I didn't. Then why I'm doing it now? The reason being, ID not found exception is not a built-in exception. It doesn't come with your Java library. ID not found exception doesn't come with your Java library. It's an exception which is created by the programmer, or it's an exception created by the developer. So this cannot be thrown by the JVM. The way the JVM was throwing the input mismatch and arithmetic, JVM cannot throw this. So the programmer need to write a logic for this. Now when I take the mouse over for seeing the compile time error, it says it's unhandled. This exception is not handled. And if you remember, I raised a point yesterday. There are two types of exceptions, checked and unchecked. Compiler forcing you to handle, then it's a check. Otherwise, it's an unchecked. But if you see here, your compiler is forcing you to handle it. So it's what? It's a checked exception. So any user-defined exception is a checked exception. Then how do we handle it? Open a try block, close a try block. So within the try block, I'm writing the piece of code. Then I'm writing a catch. So now let me try to run the program again, the run bank program. Now what happens here is, let me create a personal customer. Then I try to display the customer details. I would like to display it using customer ID. What is the customer ID? 1001. I know there is no 1002, but I'm trying to use 1002. Look at this. What happened? You see the exception message here? No customer found with a given ID. No customer found with a given ID. No customer found with a given ID. Right? But where is this message getting printed? Where is this message getting printed? This message is getting printed in the program. If you see, this is the only area where I was using my system.out.println. This is the only area where I was using my system.out.println. Otherwise, you don't see anywhere in the program. So what do you say? Do you think it's good? Because I was avoiding system.out.println because I don't want to combine my presentation with the business logic. I don't want to combine my presentation with the business logic. But because in order to handle the exception, I am forced to use a system.out.println here. So this is not recommended. When I have a solution to this, I'll help you with that. Instead of doing a try catch, see, when I take the mouse over, it says unhandled. But when I click, it gives me two solutions. Surround with try catch, or add throws declaration. So look at this, what happens when I do try catch. The same thing what happened earlier. But instead of try catch, if I use the other solution, what is the other solution? Add throws, focus. The moment I say add throws, what happened? There is a throws which is being concatenated with the method. I undo it, observe the change, line number 64, and you need to observe the line number 48. When I click on this, I am adding here. Now look, observe the line number 48. Now what is this is, now you are telling that, hey, there is some exception here, but I'm not bothered about it. There is an exception in my block of code. There is an exception in the block of code, but I'm not going to handle it. So I'm delegating it to somebody else. I'm delegating it to somebody else. Who will be worried about this? And who has a reason to worry about this? The person who is calling this method, or the program which is calling this method, should need to worry about it. When I go to the run bank, the moment I see here, oh, right. So here, now I won't be doing throws. I'll be doing try catch, because I cannot delegate from here, because this is the main program. This is where your execution starts. You cannot give it to somebody now. Of course, you still have the option also. Here also you can use throws, but it doesn't make any sense. It's you who has to handle it. That is, it's a run bank program which has to handle it. Now here I say try catch. Here I say try catch. So what you learn from this activity is, if everything is successful, you can return the value. If everything is successful, you can return the value from, if you see, you got your bank with single array. That was a program which was returning customer. Which was returning customer. It was returning a transaction. But if something goes wrong, if something goes wrong, if there is something if there is some interruption, or if there is a break of the code, then I should forward that exception message to the next layer. I should forward that exception message to the next program. So that was how you do it. With the help of throws, you carry forward that exception message to the next program. Then on this, I'm handling it. Then I give a message, ID not found. Now I run the program. Now you see this time what happens. The message won't be getting printed from the bank with single array. Rather, it gets printed from the run bank program, which is my presentation. Congratulations. Then I go with the 5. I know there is no ID called 1002. Then I still enter. Then I get a message here somewhere. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. It's 5. The choice is 5. Then you wanna do it with the help of customer ID. Yes. Then as for the customer ID, I know there is no customer ID called 1002. See, no customer found with the given ID. Then I continue with my code. So this is your exception message. And how did you forwarded this message? How did you forwarded this message? Because you are finding whether the customer exists or not in the program called bank with single array, or in the class called bank with single array. But you are printing that message not in the bank with single array. You are printing it in the run bank. But actually, what is the return type of this code? The return type of this code is customer. But when the exception arises, what did you return? You just forward the string message. But when your return type is customer, how your program was able to forward the message? It actually not returning something. It actually throwing something. What it is throwing? ID not found exception. It is throwing an object. Now that object, I'm catching it here. and when I print it, it is invoking the toString, and that gives me the message. So this is how you use a user-defined exceptions, and with the help of throws keyword, you carry forward those messages from business layer to the presentation layer. All right. So is this clear, or did I complicated it, or was it simple? Okay. All right. So let me add one more. All right. So now I said ID not found exception, right? So let me add one more exception called invalid amount exception. I'm not sure where I'm checking that. Let me check where I'm confirming whether the okay, yeah, deposit. Okay, I think I'm checking it here. Is amount greater than 0 or not? Perfect. Where it goes? Yeah. Let me add one more class. Let's say here invalid amount exception. Or let's take one more thing. Otherwise, we just add withdraw method. Copy. I want to do what? Withdraw. And what I'm doing here is get account number, right? Then if the amount is greater than 0, that's fine. If it is greater than 0, that was okay. If it is, we also, when I want to deposit, you don't only check for what I say, right? So you also need to check whether the amount is less than the balance or not, or less than equal to the given balance. Customers of I dot get account dot get balance. If it is less than, you do that. Otherwise, what you do? If the amount given entered amount is not less than the balance, then I want to say, okay, fine. What I want to say now? Let me create an exception. What exception I want to create? Insufficient funds. Insufficient funds exception. Then I create a class called extends exception. Oh, sorry, I create a class extending the exception. Then I override the toString method. Then here I'm going to give the message. What message you want to give, right? No sufficient funds. No sufficient funds in your account. So here what I'm doing here, while withdrawing, so when there is no amount, I just say throw new. What is that we have? Insufficient funds exception. Alright. Insufficient funds exception. Then I go here and what? Try catch or throws. I'm in the business layer, so no try catch. I say throws. then who should worry? I'm just throwing the exception. Then when I go here run bank.java, then I think we didn't do the withdraw. I just did, okay, it was a case 1 and yeah, case 3, case 4. Let's do this. Account number, it's gonna be for withdraw, and amount, if everything goes well, I return the transaction, otherwise this is what happens. Withdraw amount, withdraw transaction. What is the method I need to call? I need to call withdraw. But withdraw method was throwing what? Exception, right? Same, surround with try catch, and you handle it. Right. So what is the significance of print stack trace, you will understand. Let me first do this. Let me just print E1, so the exception object. So it was case 4, right? Okay. So let me create one customer first. Address for him. Then it's account number, right? Okay. So what is that? 4th option. Account number. Enter the amount. There is no money with me, so I'm just trying to withdraw this. You see here, no sufficient funds in your account. No sufficient funds in your account. That's what I was trying to do here. Now in case this message alone won't help you to debug. But this is only for a programmer. This message won't help you. This is for the end user. For end user, you tell him this. But in case for it comes to programming perspective, you want to find out the reason, where exactly the root cause. Look at this. This is what Printstacktrace. It will tell you that here is where the program started. Run bank.java. Then from there you invoked something called bank with single array.java called 101. Then it will take you to the place where the exception. So that will give you the root cause of the exception. Who was responsible? Which line number was responsible? Which program was responsible? So actually the exception is occurring in the bank with single array. You found that there are no funds. You throw an exception. And why are we using throw keyword? Why didn't I do throw new arithmetic exception? Because arithmetic exception is a built-in and it is taken care by your JVM. JVM throws it because JVM recognizes it. But insufficient funds is written by us. So we should own the responsibility of throwing it. So when you throw, it's a checked exception. It's a user-defined exception. It's a checked exception. Your compiler will force you to handle it. So either you need to do try catch or throws. But I'm not going to do try catch because if I do try catch, then I need to handle the exception here. But I know I'm separating the business logic and presentation logic. Since I'm not writing presentation here, I don't want to print any message here. So instead of handling it, instead of doing try catch, I'm using throws. So that will forward the message to the next layer. Now in this layer, I'm handling that exception and printing the message for the end user. End user realizes the mistake and he goes back and rectifies it. So this print stack trace it only helps the programmer, not the end user, because end user gets scared if we start using this big message. Alright, I hope you will be comfortable by this time with the throws keyword, and why I'm using the throws, why not try catch, and why I'm using the try catch in run bank, and why I'm not using the try catch in bank with single array, and what is the significance of throws keyword, and what is the significance of throw keyword. Now let me add few more things for the exception, right, handling concepts. I said a try block cannot be alone. I said a try block cannot be alone. It must be followed by a catch. It can be followed by a single catch or plenty of catch blocks. And when you write many catch blocks, the parent should be the last catch block and children should be before the parent. So I would like to add one more point. What is that is, a try block can be followed either by catch or final. So it is not a mandate that try should have always the catch followed. It's not a mandate that a try should always have a catch followed. So this is try. It can be followed by a catch. This is one option. What was the other option we had? It can be followed by multiple catches. It can be followed by multiple catches. Or you also have this. Try. Then you can have a catch. Then you can also have a finally. Then there is one more option. You can have a try, you can have multiple catches, then a finally, or you also have the last option, try, then simple finally, no catch. Without catches also you can add a finally. Now we're going to talk about the significance of finally block. Why do we need a finally block? And what is the significance of this finally block? What is the significance of finally block? Note. Finally block executes always. So normally catch block executes when the exception occurs. But finally block executes always, irrespective of exception occurred or not. Doesn't matter whether the exception occurred or not, finally block executes always. What is the significance of finally block getting executed always? Finally block can be used to close the resources. Finally block can be used to close the resources which opened during execution. Alright. Finally block executes always. and finally block is used to, because it execute always, I use finally block to close the resources. So it's a very simple, it's a just like, we can compare it with a household activity. You all know water faucet. You open the water faucet and water flows, and you use the water and you close the faucet. So this was your normal execution flow. You open the water faucet and you use the water and you close it. Right? So this was your task getting done. But what is the other scenario is, you open the faucet but you don't find the water. What do you do? Will you stop it or you don't? You still need to close it, right? Your task is not fulfilled. You open the faucet, there was no water, so your job is not done. But still, what is your responsibility? Your responsibility is to close it. If you don't, what happens? There will be a leakage later. So I need to close the resources which are open. This is must for me. This is a very good convention to close the resources which are open, irrespective of whether your job is done or not. But which is the only block which executes always? Because if there is a termination, your Java code doesn't get completed. If there are 10 lines of code, if your fifth line is throwing the exception. If you have 10 lines of code and if your fifth line is throwing an exception, what happens? The rest of the lines, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, they don't get executed. If your complete code is not getting executed, then you are not closing the resources. So we start using finally block, because finally block guarantees the execution. It always gets executed, and I write the logic or I write the piece of code in the finally block to close the resource. I write the piece of code in the finally block to close the resource. So let me demonstrate a very simple example where I'll be opening the file, then I'll be using a finally block to close it. So let me create a file on a desktop with some data. So I'm saving this file onto the desktop. You can give any extension. It got saved here onto the desktop. Let me pick the address of it. It's onto the desktop. And what is the file? Data.txt. Then here I'm going to create a class. Let's say read file. I'm going to pick a main method. So here you will be learning a lot of things. I'm going to stress on finally block here. I'm going to stress on finally block here, and I'm also going to stress on how do we open a file and how do we read from it, right? And then how do we close the file. So first thing is, I need a file which is from the java.io package. I need a file I need a file class. I need a class file which is from the java.io package. Then I also need file reader, because this will help me in reading from the file. This will help me in reading from the file. I also need a buffer reader. This will help me in reading from a file line by line, not character by character. Buffer reader will help me in reading from a file line by line, not character by character. Now I try to put the piece of code, or I just do this. Let me create a file object. I'm creating the object of the class file, and the constructor of the class file takes a string argument. That string argument is nothing but the file on the desktop. It can be anywhere. And because backslash is a special character, but this is my address. But in programming language, a backslash has a significant meaning. So to nullify that meaning, I'm using 2 forward slashes. So when I use 2 forward slashes, it assumes as a single one. So this is, you are referring to the file which is on hard disk. That is on your secondary memory. Now what is your next job? My next job is to open the file to read. My next job is to open the file to read. Then I see exception, checker exception. You are opening the file to read it, and you see a checker exception. It says file not found exception. There is a possibility of file not found. You are trying to open a file, but that file may exist or may not exist. So there is a possibility of exception here, and your compiler is forcing you to handle it. What you do? Surround with try catch and throws. This is the main method. This is where my program execution starts. So I will say try catch rather than the throws. So let's put the piece of code into a try block. The piece of code which is expected to throw the exception should be in a try block. You can use Printstacktrace, that will give you the complete root cause of the problem. Or you can simply say E, that will print the problem. Now you open the file to read it, but how you want to read it? You want to read character by character or line by line? I want to read line by line. So from where you want to read? You want to read, I want to read from file reader. So file object is given to the file reader, and file reader object is given to the buffer reader. Now what next? As I said, I want to read it. Simple. Buffer reader dot read line. So you read line by line. Now again, if you take the mouse over, you see unhandled exception, and this type it is IO exception. Click. You have a try catch, you have a throws, and you see the other one. Add catch to the existing try. I don't want to have a pair of try catches. I don't want to have pair of try catches. So I already have a try block. I say, why don't you add the catch to the existing try? Why you want to create a new try? If I say surround with try catch, it will create a new try catch, if you see. But I'm not interested in that. I say, why don't you add the catch to the existing try block? Start. Now, but I need to continue reading, right? I read only one line. So I'm checking is that line is null or not. If the line is not null, then why don't you print it? And after printing, why don't you read the next line? So you continue reading. You continue reading. How long you continue reading? As long as it is not null. If it is null, then you stop it. You see the output on it. But did I close the file which I opened? No. I can do that. How? In the try block itself, I can simply say, after my job is done, I can say buffer reader dot close. Then I can say file reader dot close. So whatever the resources I opened, I can close it with the help of calling the close method. But the concern is the line number 24 executed, line number 25 executed, line number 26 executed, then line number 28 there was a problem. Then what happens when there is a problem or when there is an exception? Your rest of the lines in the try block, they don't get executed. Means from line number 29 to 35 they don't get executed, they directly go to the catch block. But am I closing the resource now when the exception happens? When no exception happens, your program code executes, then you close it. But when the exception happens, you are not closing it because it gets terminated. So I have to ensure that the close methods gets executed always, or closing of the resources gets executed always. Then we have a solution to it. What is that? We found that there is something called finally, and we found that this block executes always. We found that this block executes always the finally block. Then I use finally block to close the resources. Now since this close method also throws an exception, that's it. And one more thing is, before you close, you have to ensure whether it is opened or not. You're just closing it in the finally block. You're just closing it in the finally block, but before you close, please do ensure whether it is opened or not. If it is not null, then there is a reason to close it. If it is null, then you don't need to close it, right? If it is null, you don't need to close it. If it is not null, then there is a reason to close it. Now your program is complete. Yep. Yeah. Any question on this part, or is it clear?
Hi Arun, when we are using the try catch in the finally block, we cannot use simply the
if you see, let's go here. File reader dot and buffer reader dot. So I was talking about the throws. So this close method is not defined by me. This close method is a built-in. The close method is a built-in, which is not defined by me. So the people who define the close method, that is the people who define this java.io API, their close method is throwing the exception, like we had in our program, right? In our program where it was, we have our method, right? So we had our method which was throwing the exception. In the same way, this close method, whoever defined it, they added a throws keyword to it. Since they are throwing it, and I'm the one who want to call that method, then it becomes my responsibility to catch it. So, since this finally block, I am writing a piece of code which needs to be handled. If you take the mouse over, it says, hey, there is an exception, it being thrown, IO exception. So I'm forced to do throws or try catch. But this is my main method, so I use try catch. Then there must be another question over here. When I wrote these 2 lines of code in the try block, when I wrote these 2 lines of code here, then there was no problem, right? Because there was no problem because you're already handling them, right? So these catches are this for try block. They won't be applicable here. So in the finally, again you need to handle that try catch exception. Right? Then other thing is, I was trying to tell you that before you close it, ensure whether it is opened or not. If it is not open, you don't need to close it. If it is not open, you don't need to close it because finally block executes always. So before you close in the finally block, ensure that the resource is open. If it is open, you close it. Otherwise, you don't need to do that. No, finally block cannot exist without try. Try block, the finally block exists only with the try. Finally block exists only with the try, not alone. Yeah. And did I answer your question? Are you?
Yes, yes, sir. But the finally is only used to close all the resources, or is any other significant is for the finally?
You can write any other logic inside it, but
Okay.
mostly people use it, or it's recommended to clean up whatever the cleanup process you want to do. Use that in the finally block. Do it in the finally block. Or any code which you want to ensure that it should execute before you terminate or before you close, put it inside a finally block.
Oh, okay. So we can write any logic also, right?
We can do that.
Okay.
But it doesn't make any sense if I write some business logic in the finally. Right?
Okay.
So it's used to clean up. It is used for cleanup activities. So it is better we use it for cleaning up the things in the finally block.
Okay. So, and one more question, whenever we are using the file or something, the resources, we must use the try catch block?
Oh, it's not mandatory that you should use a try catch block as long as your compiler is not forcing you to handle it.
Okay.
But in order to debug the program, then it is good that you put a try catch and print the exception message. Or you can also do Printstacktrace to figure out the exception problem.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Arun.
Alright, so we learned how do we open a file, how do we read it, and how do we close the resources which we open. Now, this is my file and I have some data which is in a string format. How do I break it? Because a single line represents a record. A single line represents a record, whereas every semicolon is separating the fields. So we have something called string tokenizer. It has nothing to do with the files concept. I just want to introduce you to this string tokenizer. So where it belongs to java.util package. So you can pass your first argument, the string, and you can pass your second argument, the separator. So every field is being separated by semicolon, right? So I'm using that. What happened? What do we have? The separator is semicolon. Perfect. So that line, I'm trying to break it into tokens every time I come across a semicolon. Divide into tokens. Then how do we read them? Simple. While string tokenizer dot has more tokens, then you can print it now. String tokenizer dot next token. So every line is a record. Then you are breaking the line when every time you come across a semicolon, and you are printing it. Now you see the difference in the output. Okay, what happened now? You got a line, you read it, you break it into pieces and you print it, and okay, got it. This should not be now, this should be here. After you print everything, see, you are reading a line, then you break it into pieces, then you read your next line. You read a first line, then you need to divide it into tokens, then you read your next line. Go back and check whether it is null or not. Then you break it. Then you read your next line. Go back and check whether it is null or not. Now what happened here was, I was reading a line, then before I break it into tokens, I was reading another line which was not existing. So you had a null pointer exception. But now you won't find that null pointer exception because you're reading a line, you're breaking into pieces, then you are reading the next line. After reading the next line, you go back and confirm whether it is null or not. Alright, now what next? So we know how to read from a file and we know how to print it. So let's learn how do I write something into a file. See, actually these files are, normally people don't use it because we have a databases, right? So there is no need to use the file, but still it's only for the information. It won't be of much. You won't be using a lot of file system, alright? You won't be using it, but it's only for the knowledge and say. Then let me open here, let me write something called store record into file. And here we go. Storing a record into a file. How do we do that? As usual, first I need a file. Oh, what do I need? I don't need a file reader, I need a file writer. Then open the file object or create a file object and you need to pass the address. I would like to open the same file which is already got some data. Then I got a file object. Then I would like to open the file, but I would like to open the file for what? To write. I would like to open the file for what? I would like to open the file to write. But when you wish to write, would you like to override what is already there? When you wish to write, would you like to override which is already there, or would you like to append? If you might like to override, then just use this. Only file. If you like to override, but if you don't want to override, you want to keep the information, then use true. Then this will append the information. Then again the same stuff. Unhandled exception. Try catch. Now what next? Here you got a file object and you got a file writer object. What? I would like to construct a string. String text equal to, I don't know what it is, the data I have 1001 and 1002. I would like to add something in double quotes, 1003, semicolon. Now what I would like to do, I would like to write it to the file. File writer dot write, simple, and a string argument, text. Then you need to close the resources. But what will you choose? Will you try to close the resources like this, file writer dot close. This doesn't guarantee that every time it will close it. Just go to the finally block. Then in the finally block, you try to close it. But we need to handle exception again. But before you close, do ensure whether it is null or not. If it is not null, then you close it. Otherwise, you don't need to do that. I'm sorry. Let's go back and open the file and see. It got added. So it's getting added in the same line. Alright, so we just need to figure out what is the solution to do that, to go to a new line. But I'm not sure this will help us. 1000 backslash, and I don't think it will gonna help us. If it helps, it's good, but it's not helping us. So there should be some other solution, alright? Like, we need to figure out what is that, so that we can move the text to the next line. So we learned how do we open a file and how do we, how do we read from a file and how do we write it into a file. But there is one more stuff. What exactly I was trying to write it into a file? I was trying to write string into a file, right? You see, what did I do? I wrote string into a file. And when I was reading a string from a file. So instead of reading a string from a file or instead of writing a string into a file, can I store object into a file? I reiterate the question. Instead of storing a string into a file, or instead of reading a string from a file, can I read and write objects? Can I read and write objects? So let's try to figure it out. I'm creating a class. Let the class name be employee. Now this employee got attributes. Yeah, since you are in the employee class, you don't need to say it as an employee ID. You just say ID, because you use that ID on employee object, so that indicates that it's an employee ID only. You can say name. So I got two things, ID, name. Then let me add salary to it too. Right click to get the right click and source getters and setters. This is fine. You have an employee.java. Then I'll be writing a class store read object, and I am going with a main method. What I need to do now is I need to store an object first, and I need to read an object. So first let me create a file object. Now I need a new file, and to write, what do I need? No, I won't be depending on file writer now. Rather, I'll be depending on file output stream and object output. So I want to write what? I want to write object. So first, let me create a file object, and I need an address. So let me pick up the same address and create a new file. It's a new file dot data or whatever the file extension you want, you can have it. Then you are associating the file object with file output stream. Then you are associating this file output stream with object output stream. Then you see exception, then add a try catch. Because you are trying to open a file may exist or may not exist. Now what is this? This is for IO exception. So I already have a try, so I'll add catch to the existing try. Then what next then? I need to create an object. I did. What I do is, let me rename this file name. I won't be reading in the same program. I would like to read it in a different program. Let's say store object. This is fine. Now, for that employee, I would like to set the ID. I would like to set the name, and I also would like to set the salary. Then I would like to write this object to the file. After writing the object to the file, then what next? You just need to close it. But before you close, ensure they are open. It makes sense to close it if they are open, otherwise there is no need. We are done. Let me run this. What happened? You see an exception. It's not serialized. It's not serialized. So if you want to store object into a file, you cannot simply do this. Your class employee must implement serializable interface. But to our surprise, the serializable is an interface, but there is no method to override. Normally we learn when we implement interface, we are expected to override some methods. When we implement interface, we are expected to override some methods. But here this is a change. The serializable is a marker interface. Serializable is a marker interface and got no methods to override. Serializable is a marker interface and got no methods to override. Now you try to store the object. Go back and see the file. A file got created. You open the file and you won't be able to read it. You won't be able to read it. The reason? Oh, the reason is not that it got the extension as a DAT. Even if you give the extension as a TXT also, we won't be able to read this file. The reason, you use the stream mode. There are two types of streams. There are two types of streams. The binary stream and the character stream. So the classes ending with reader or writer, they support character mode, which is readable. The classes ending with stream, they support your binary mode, so which you cannot read them. That is for machine to understand. But if I cannot read this, what is the point of creating this? If you want to read this, then again you need to write a program. Whereas if you want to read this, you can just open it and read it. Whereas if you want to read this file, you cannot read it simply. You have to create a program to do that. I'm gonna do it. I say read object, the main method. Let me pick up this all stuff. I can go back and edit it. What do you want to do? I want to read it. So in order to read, you won't be using file output stream. Instead, you need a file input stream. Output stream is to write, not to read. So instead of object output stream, you also need object input stream. Now it is not your job to write an object. Your job is to read an object. How do we do that? OIS.readObject. So when you read object, it returns object. That is parent. So here there is a point to discuss. object is a class in Java and it is the parent of all the classes in Java. Exception is a class in Java which is the parent of all the exceptions. What about object? It's the parent of all the classes. Exception is only parent for exceptions. But this object is a parent for everybody. So let me do it more. This is what happens. OIS dot read object. Then you need to convert it back to employee because from parent you have to convert it back to child. That's what I did. Then I give a messages. Employee dot get ID. Then whatever I stored, I'm trying to read it. Employee dot get name. Employee dot get salary. Right here, we just need to close them, whatever we opened. And this read object again throws an exception called class not found exception. What is this class not found exception? In the sense, you are trying to read an object, right? It returns in the parent format. It returns in the parent format. But I need to typecast that back to child, right? So the respective child should exist. If it doesn't exist, then it throws the class not found exception. And suppose if I am storing a customer object, then customer class should exist. If it doesn't exist, it throws a class not found exception. So it tries to locate for that file. If it doesn't found, it throws class not found exception or no. You cannot open this file and read it. But you can write a program. That program can read the data for you from the file. So reading object from a file is called deserialization. Reading object from a file is called deserialization. Storing object into a file is called serialization. And the classes which helps us is object output stream, file output stream to write, object input stream and file input stream to read. Yeah. Any question on this part? The serialization part? Okay. So we spoke about the significance of throw, throws, finally. And in the business layer, you don't handle it. You don't do try catch. You rather propagate the message or you forward the message using throws. And in the presentation, you catch it and you print it. Then we moved on to the significance of finally. Then we found that finally is used to close the resources because it gets executed always. And finally cannot exist alone, it has to exist along with a try. Then we saw how to open a file and read. Then we first did reading a string. Then we did writing a string into a file. Now we did serialization, whereas serialization is the process of writing object into a file and deserialization is the process of reading object from a file. If you want to store an object into a file, then the respective class must implement serializable, which is a marker interface. Now what do you mean by a marker interface? An interface with no abstract methods in it. So you don't need to override when you implement. This is the happiest thing. You implement something and you acquire a feature, but you don't need to write any logic. Now the classes which helps us in reading the object is file input stream and object input stream, and the classes which helps us in writing is file and output stream and object output stream. And there are two types of streams. One is the binary and the character. Then how will you differentiate which is character mode and which is binary mode? If you are using the classes ending with reader and writer, they are character mode. If you are using the classes ending with the stream, they are your binary mode. That's the summary of the class today. Alright, so if you have questions, I'll take it up. If no, then we'll stop here. We'll catch you in the next session. Same time tomorrow.